Hello, and welcome back to the Creatively Curious podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walter. Today, we're going to be looking at unhelpful thinking styles or cognitive distortions. So, these are some of the things that I look for when I'm coaching a client. So, lots of times people will have these all or nothing thinking styles. That's an example of one, or um, things that they believe that are kind of like sweeping generalizations that I'll look for. And if I notice them, then oftentimes I'll point them out and then we can stop and take a look at them, especially if it's a painful thought, something that's causing them distress, and then we can break it down from there. But it's helpful, I think, to know, just for you to be aware or for anyone to be aware of how generalized and how sweeping our thoughts and statements can be, and how actually they're really not helpful. So I'll just go through. I have a list of a number of them, so I'll go through each one. I'm going to be looking at some notes while I'm doing this podcast. So if you're watching it, that's why I keep looking down. And basically, it's just for you to be aware of, nothing really to do unless you want to not do these things. And then just notice when you are doing them and kind of redirect yourself. So, and then in the show notes, I'll put some references as to where I picked up this information. So the first unhelpful thinking style is mental filter. So filtering in and filtering out information, like only paying attention to certain types of evidence and usually paying attention to negative detail or negative information and not seeing the whole picture. So kind of having a tunnel vision. An example of that would be, I am not able to answer the phones, so I will never be able to work in an office. The next unhelpful thinking style is called jumping to conclusions. And so it actually has two parts. The first part is mind reading. So that definition would be assuming that we know what someone else is thinking and believing without evidence. So I actually see that a lot with my daughter, where she'll just assume she knows what somebody else is thinking. And I say to her, how do you know that? Like, what is your evidence for that? So an example would be, they know I am not going to be able to do it, or they think I'm not going to be able to do it, or they think I'm not good enough, or something like that. The second part of this style, jumping to conclusions, is fortune telling. So making predictions about what is going to happen in the future. They won't accept me, they won't talk to me, they won't like me, stuff like that. So these actually could be really helpful for kids, because I see that fear happening in my daughter who's getting a little bit older. So this third unhelpful thinking style is personalization. And that definition is blaming yourself for everything that goes wrong, even when only partially or you're not responsible at all. The other part of the definition is believing others are behaving negatively because of you, and you don't consider other possible explanations. So really blaming yourself. This is all my fault. You know, they were acting like this because of what I did, and not considering that other people could have responsibility as well. Another unhelpful thinking style is catastrophizing. Does anyone do that? I'm going to raise my hand on that one. So that definition is blowing things out of proportion is terrible, even though the issue is quite small. If that were to happen, I'll have a heart attack, or I'll be so upset that I won't be able to function at all. Or I get really nervous, public speaking. So, I'll be so nervous, way too nervous to even go ahead with that speech. The next unhelpful thinking style is all or nothing thinking. And this, you hear this a lot. So the definition is you view a situation in only two extreme categories instead of a continuum. So sometimes it's called black or white thinking. So I'm either doing it right or I'm doing it wrong. Or like, um, I mean, I mean, we see, I won't get into political stuff, but it's like that binary thinking that there's this way or that way, male or female. Like, you know what? That's why I call this podcast Creatively Curious. Life is creative. Uh, and so there's myriad of options generally. There's so many options that we can't even think about. There's so many of them. So instead of just like this or that, left or right, there's only two things. What if you opened your mind to thinking that there's a whole bunch of options and I'm just not aware of them right now, but they could possibly come to me. So the next unhelpful thinking style is should or must statements. So we call that shoulding on yourself. Those are come up a lot in coaching. So by saying I should or I must, it puts unrealistic or unreasonable demands on yourself. So kind of fixed idea of what needs to happen, then overestimate how bad it is. And when it does not happen, then you lead to guilt and feeling of failure. So I should be able to run a marathon in 2 hours, but I can't, so blah, blah, blah. Or it's even just like, I should go visit my grandma this weekend because nobody's going to be able to visit her. I should vacuum the floor right now instead of painting, but I don't really want to. And then I'm going to feel guilty because I should be doing all these things. So one thing I do with coaching is changing the should to could. So I could do that. I could vacuum my floor right now, but instead I'm choosing to record a podcast. Maybe I'll do some art later. Wouldn't mind jumping on my bike. And when you change it to could, then there's power in that. Like I could do, again, there's myriad of opportunities, options. So what do I really want to do? And for the shoulds, like, could you have someone else do that should if you really don't want to? But the next unhelpful thinking style is overgeneralization. So taking one instance from the past and imposing it on the present or the future. So making a sweeping negative conclusion or generalization that goes far beyond the current situation. So being overly broad in your conclusions. So nothing good will ever happen. And like I've been there too, right? When things are kind of going bad and it kind of feels like nothing good will ever happen again, but that's just a thought. It's a negative thought and overgeneralization of things that can happen. The next unhelpful thinking style is labeling. So making global statements based on behavior in specific situations and assigning labels to self or others without considering that the evidence does not support such an extreme negative conclusion. So I'm a loser, they're all losers. You know, what's the evidence of that? The next unhelpful thinking style is emotional reasoning. So basing your view of the situation on your feeling only. So thinking that something must be true because you strongly feel it and ignoring evidence to the contrary. So if you feel a certain way, then it must be true. So that's, I mean, this is a tough one a little bit because I feel like we, especially in my life coaching, we go into the body a lot and we notice how we are feeling about things. And I know, for instance, for me, one thing came up where I was feeling really anxious about the traffic, or not the traffic, the weather. We were on the highway and I was feeling really anxious about the road conditions. And I was like, where is this coming from? Like, I just felt like, okay, we gotta be really mindful of how we're driving. I wasn't driving, my husband was at the time. It was like really strong. And then, sure enough, 20 minutes later, wall-to-wall traffic because there were accidents all over the road. So I did have a strong feeling that something wasn't right. Um, but I was like aware. I was noticing how I was feeling, noticing it in my body, just like what is going on, and not like, oh, something bad's gonna happen. We're, jumping to a conclusion. We're all gonna die or something like that, because that's pretty strong negative thought that I don't have any evidence of. But then, okay, there were lots and lots of accidents on that road, more so than I've ever seen, actually. So, but the definition of this is if you're ignoring evidence to the contrary. So if you have evidence, like if we're on the highway, I'm feeling super anxious, the weather was like warm, it was sunny, there were no conditions on the road that would indicate that we would have accidents. Not saying that there couldn't have been a feeling still, but then I would have been like, okay, what is this anxiety about? At that time, the weather, I think, was just above zero. So it's kind of that, like there was like a skiff of snow on the highway. It was like that line of like it's melting, but I think it's icy. We have the snow, it's like slippery. It was just really kind of wonky conditions. So I had external evidence to kind of support how I was feeling and what I was thinking. So, anywho, the last unhelpful thinking style is magnification and minimization, um, disqualifying the positive of self. So, what does that mean? It means magnifying the positives about others while discounting the good about yourself. So, who's done that? Probably many of us. So, explaining away your own positive characteristics and indicating that positive experiences, behaviors, or qualities experienced in yourself don't count. So, or again, I definitely notice that in myself, and I see that in clients, is like you almost forget the good that you've done, or forget, you kind of just move on and not take it for granted, but kind of. So an example of that is, yes, but this doesn't count. Like, yes, I'm a good athlete, but that's just how I am. Or yes, I'm a really good reader, but it doesn't count because I really like reading. Um, so yeah, I see that quite a bit in coaching clients. And actually what just came to mind was Benjamin Hardy, Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. Is he has a practice of remembering and writing down all the good things, and he teaches this, all the good things that happened that week. Like he's very mindful about doing a summary of the month, but he does it for the week as well, of all the good things that you've done instead of focusing on the bad. So like I'm sure you've heard, we have a negativity bias as people, because it saved us. It used to save us when we were getting hunted by the saber-toothed tiger. We had to be aware of all the negative things that were in our environment that could come up for our survival. Now, we don't really have those threats anymore, but we're still wired for that. So we're always kind of scanning, looking for the negative. And we really need to retrain ourselves, and not to like discount negative things or real things that are happening, but that stuff that we just kind of make up. And if you're watching the news, you get a whole dose of it from the news, which I do not partake in. But he really believes in retraining that. So looking back at your day, looking back at your week, looking back at your month, and all the positive growth that has happened, all the things that you've achieved, and really focusing on that. Because when we do that, then what happens? We feel better and we kind of go, yeah, I did do some really good things and I'm proud of that. Then you move forward on that path in that feeling instead of like the negative, which is easy to get into. And he has a book called The Gap in the Gain, where he talks about being in the gap, which is like, if I serve my kids something for supper that they don't like, oh, I don't want this. This is gross. Or a cookie. I made cookies that my little boy said, these are disgusting. You need to make a new batch. So you're in the gap, dude. I just gave you a cookie that you didn't have to make, and it's still a cookie that tastes okay. Um, so being in the gap is just kind of focusing on that negative stuff, the things you didn't get, what you wanted, and blah blah blah. And being in the gain is like kind of that gratitude piece of like being thankful and not saying that you don't have wishes or don't have dreams or don't have things that you want to achieve, but really being appreciative for what you have, what's around you, and just that mindset of focusing on what you have, what you don't have. That focusing on what you have versus focusing on what you don't have. And so even when, you have an idea for your future, you have a future self that you're working towards, if you're kind of like, oh, but there's a gap, I'm not there yet, then you're feeling that discomfort or that angst of like, I'm not there, there's like that lack. But if you felt appreciative and grateful for that future self, for who you are in the future, and just trusting and knowing that you will get there, that's a different feeling. That's a different state than focusing on that gap of where you are. So here you are in the future. What does that feel like? What does that look like? And being grateful for that versus noticing the gap. So hopefully this helps. You can take a look at your thoughts or what you say out loud a little bit differently. And if you notice that you are someone who does any of these unhelpful thinking styles, if you're aware of it, then you can be aware of what not to do. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I'll have my website information in the show notes. And if you're interested in coaching, please reach out. Have a great day.